My sister slept with my husband. Then my family took her side. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd lose my husband, my sister, and almost my entire family in the same week, I would have laughed. I thought the hardest thing I'd ever face was infertility. I had no idea that heartbreak was only the beginning. I'm 27. My husband Daniel is 30, and my older sister Claire is 29. Daniel and I had been married for 5 years. We spent almost 3 of those years trying to have a baby. At first, we thought it would happen naturally, but month after month brought nothing except disappointment. Eventually, we started seeing fertility specialists, hoping they could tell us why nothing was working. The answers weren't what we'd hoped for. After weeks of tests, I was diagnosed with a couple of medical conditions that made getting pregnant naturally extremely difficult. The doctors told us there were still options, but they'd involve expensive treatments, more appointments, and no guarantees. I was devastated. Daniel wrapped his arms around me in the doctor's office and promised we'd get through it together. He kept telling me that he married me because he loved me, not because I could give him children. Every time I broke down, he reminded me we were a team. I believed every word. Claire knew everything too. She was the first person I called after every appointment. She'd bring dinner over, sit with me while I cried, and remind me that none of this was my fault. Whenever I worried Daniel would eventually resent me, she'd tell me to stop. Thinking like that because he loved me too much to ever leave. Those conversations still haunt me. At the time, though, I was just grateful to have a sister who cared. She became my biggest source of support outside my marriage, and I honestly don't know how I would have made it through those months without her. Looking back now, that's probably what hurts the most. She didn't just know I was struggling. She knew exactly where I was at my weakest. As the months passed, our lives settled into a routine built around hope and disappointment. Every few weeks we'd have another appointment, another scan, or another conversation about treatment options. Daniel came to almost every visit, and when he couldn't, Claire usually offered to sit with me instead. I thought I was incredibly lucky to have both of them supporting me through the hardest period of my life. When I wasn't working, I spent most of my time researching fertility treatments or trying to distract myself from thinking about babies. Claire would often stop by after work with coffee or dinner, insisting I shouldn't be alone. Daniel always welcomed her, and before long, Friday night dinners became a regular tradition. Looking back, I realized they had more opportunities to be together than I ever questioned. At the time, it felt completely normal. Then little things started changing. Daniel began saying work was getting busier. At first, it was one late night every couple of weeks. Then it became every week. He always had a reasonable explanation. A client needed help. Someone had called in sick, or his manager had asked him to stay back. I never challenged him. Claire also became strangely difficult to make plans with. If I suggested lunch, she'd already have something on. If I asked her to come shopping, she'd tell me she was exhausted from work. It wasn't that she stopped talking to me altogether. She just always seemed unavailable whenever I wanted to spend time together. The strange part was that neither of them acted differently around me. Daniel was still affectionate. Claire still called to check on me. Nothing felt obviously wrong. The first time I questioned anything was completely by accident. I called Claire one Saturday afternoon to see if she wanted to come over for a barbecue. She didn't answer, which wasn't unusual, so I left a voicemail. A few minutes later, I rang Daniel to ask when he'd be home. He didn't answer either. Again, nothing strange. He told me he was helping one of his mates move into a new apartment, so I figured he was busy carrying furniture. About an hour later, Claire texted saying she'd been asleep all afternoon. 10 minutes after that, Daniel messaged saying they were only just stopping for lunch because moving had taken longer than expected. Neither message meant anything on its own, but for some reason, seeing them arrive so close together left me with a feeling I couldn't explain. For the first time in our marriage, a tiny voice in the back of my mind whispered that something wasn't quite right. I tried to convince myself I was overthinking everything. After everything Daniel and I had been through, it felt ridiculous to question him over something as small as a missed phone call. Claire had always been terrible at answering her phone, and Daniel had worked overtime before. There was nothing concrete to suggest anything was wrong. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more little things. Daniel suddenly became protective of his phone. It wasn't like he refused to let me touch it, but he was always quick to grab it whenever a notification came through. If he left the room, the phone went with him. At night, instead of leaving it charging on his bedside table like he always had, he'd place it face down or take it into the bathroom while he showered. I tried telling myself people change habits all the time. Then Claire started acting differently too. Whenever the three of us were together, she'd occasionally go quiet if Daniel and I talked about our fertility treatments. Instead of offering encouragement like she normally did, she'd quickly change the subject or find a reason to leave the room. I figured she was probably uncomfortable watching us struggle. I never imagined guilt could look exactly the same. A few days later, Mom invited everyone over for Sunday lunch. It was supposed to be a relaxing afternoon with the whole family, but something happened that I couldn't ignore. Daniel offered to help Claire carry drinks into the kitchen while everyone else stayed outside. They were only gone for a minute or two, yet when they came back, they both looked strangely flustered. Claire wouldn't meet my eyes. Daniel smiled a little too much, as if he was trying to prove everything was normal. Even my younger brother gave them a curious look before shrugging it off. I remember asking Daniel later what had taken so long. He laughed and said Claire had dropped a glass and they cleaned it up before anyone stepped on the broken pieces. It sounded believable. I accepted the explanation without another thought. Now I wish I'd walked into that kitchen myself, because not long after that family lunch, everything I'd believed about my marriage and about my sister came crashing down in a way I never could have prepared for. 3 days later, my entire world fell apart. Daniel had left for work that morning like it was any other Tuesday. I was working from home and decided to spend my lunch break sorting through some paperwork for our upcoming fertility consultation. While looking for one of our insurance documents, I remembered Daniel had scanned a few files onto our laptop. We shared the computer. Neither of us had passwords or secret folders. There had never been a reason for them. I opened the messaging app that was synced to his phone, hoping to find the document he'd sent me a few weeks earlier. Instead, I found a conversation with Claire. At first, I thought it was completely innocent. The first few messages were about Mom's birthday and what everyone was bringing for lunch. Then I scrolled a little further. Everything changed. The messages became flirtatious. Then they became explicit. I stared at the screen, convinced. I had to be misunderstanding what I was reading. My hands started shaking so badly. I had to grip the edge of the desk to stop myself from dropping the laptop. There were months of messages, private jokes, photos, conversations about meeting while I was at work or attending doctor's appointments. They joked about how easy it was because I trusted them both completely. Every message felt like another knife twisting deeper into my chest. Then I reached the message that destroyed me. Claire had written that she had taken another pregnancy test that morning. Daniel replied almost immediately, "I still can't believe we're actually having a baby." I stopped breathing. I read those words again and again. I wanted them to mean something else, but there was no other explanation. the woman I'd cried to about my infertility, the sister who had hugged me after every failed appointment, was carrying my husband's child. I don't remember falling to the floor, but I remember sitting there staring at the screen through tears that wouldn't stop coming. Everything suddenly made sense. The late nights, the canceled plans, the strange behavior, the guilty looks, the whispered conversations. It had all been happening right in front of me, while I kept thanking them for supporting me. For almost an hour, I just sat there crying. Then something inside me changed. I wiped my face, picked up my phone, and called Daniel. I only said 6 words. "I know everything. Come home. Now." The line went completely silent. Daniel was home in less than 20 minutes. The second he walked through the front door, he looked at my face, then at the laptop sitting open on the dining table. He didn't have to ask what was wrong. He already knew. Neither of us spoke for what felt like forever. Finally, he let out a long sigh and quietly asked, "How much did you see?" I couldn't believe those were the first words out of his mouth. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Let me explain." Just wanting to know how badly he'd been caught. I turned the laptop around so he could see the conversation still open on the screen. "Enough," I said. I saw enough. His shoulders dropped, and he pulled out a chair before sitting down. He looked exhausted, like he'd been carrying the weight of this secret for months. I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. "Tell me I'm wrong," I begged. "Tell me those messages mean something else." He stared at the floor. "I can't." Those 2 words shattered whatever tiny piece of hope I still had. "How long?" He rubbed his hands together before answering. "About 5 months. 5 months. Almost the exact amount of time we'd been discussing fertility treatments. While I was sitting in waiting rooms praying. I'd become pregnant, he'd been getting my sister pregnant instead. I felt physically sick. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. When I came back into the kitchen, he was still sitting exactly where I'd left him. "Why?" I asked. "I don't know." "Don't lie to me again." He covered his face with his hands. "It just happened." I laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because that answer was so unbelievably pathetic. It didn't just happen. I snapped. People don't accidentally have an affair for 5 months. He finally looked at me. "We got close after one of your appointments. You were shutting everyone out. Then Claire was trying to help. We started talking, then one night we crossed the line. And after that, he couldn't answer. He didn't need to. The messages had already told me everything." "You both watched me cry," I whispered. "You sat there while I blamed myself for not being able to have children." Tears filled his eyes. "I know." "No," I replied. "You don't." I stood and pointed toward the front door. "I want you out of this house." For the first time all afternoon, he actually looked frightened. "I have nowhere to go." I stared at him in disbelief. "That's not my problem anymore." Daniel didn't argue. He walked upstairs in silence and started throwing clothes into a duffel bag. Every few minutes, I heard a drawer slam shut, but neither of us said another word. I just sat at the kitchen table staring at the laptop, reading the messages over and over like I was trying to convince myself they weren't real. An hour later, he carried his bags downstairs. Before opening the front door, he stopped. "I'm sorry." I looked at him without saying a word. "I never wanted to hurt you." I couldn't believe he actually said that. "You didn't want to hurt me?" I asked quietly. "Then why did you keep doing it?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "There were hundreds of chances to stop," I continued. "Every text message, every lie, every time you came home and kissed me, every doctor's appointment where you held. my hand while sleeping with my sister behind my back. He lowered his head. I know. No, Daniel, you don't. I walked over and opened the front door myself. You made your choice months ago. He stood there for another few seconds before picking up his bag and walking outside. He didn't look back. The moment his car disappeared down the street, I completely fell apart. I cried harder than I ever had in my life. Not because I wanted him back, because I finally understood that everything I'd believed about my marriage had been a lie. After what felt like hours, I picked up my phone and called the only other person who deserved to hear from me. Claire answered almost immediately. Hey, she said cheerfully. Everything okay? Hearing her act so normal made something inside me snap. I know. Silence. I know about you and Daniel. There wasn't even an attempt to deny it. Instead, she quietly whispered, I was going to tell you. I actually laughed. When? After the baby's born? She started crying. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You've been sleeping with my husband for 5 months. I didn't mean to fall in love. Those words hit me harder than anything Daniel had said. Not because they explained what happened, but because they proved. She thought being in love somehow made betraying me acceptable. You sat beside me while I cried about not being able to have children. I said, you looked me in the eye and told me everything would be okay. She broke down sobbing. I'm so sorry. No, I replied. You're sorry you got caught. Then I hung up. I had no idea that the hardest conversations were still ahead of me. Because by the next evening, my entire family knew the truth, and somehow, I was the one they expected to fix it. By the following morning, everyone in my family knew. I didn't have to tell them Claire had already called our parents. For a brief moment, I actually believed they were ringing to see if I was okay. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first call came from Mom. She didn't ask how I was holding up. She didn't ask if I'd eaten or if I needed somewhere to stay. Instead, the first thing she said was, Claire's a complete mess. I sat there in stunned silence. Mom, she slept with my husband. I know, sweetheart, but she's terrified. She's pregnant, and she's scared. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So am I supposed to feel sorry for her? No, but she's still your sister. I hung up. 10 minutes later, Dad called. His approach was different, but somehow even worse. He spoke calmly, telling me everyone makes mistakes and that families survive difficult times if people are willing to forgive. A mistake? I interrupted. Forgetting my birthday is a mistake. Parking in the wrong spot is a mistake. Sleeping with my husband for 5 months isn't a mistake. Dad sighed. I'm not defending what she did. It certainly sounds like you are. I'm trying to stop this family from falling apart. I couldn't stop myself from laughing. This family already fell apart. That afternoon, my younger brother, Ryan, came over. Unlike our parents, he actually asked how I was doing. For nearly an hour, we sat in my living room talking about everything that had happened, he admitted. He couldn't understand how Claire could betray me like that. For the first time since discovering the affair, I felt like someone was actually listening. Then he looked down at the floor. But the moment he said that word, my stomach sank. Mom and Dad are hoping everyone can eventually move past this. I stared at him. They want me to forgive her? They just don't want to lose either of you. So they're asking the person who was betrayed to make everyone else comfortable? Ryan didn't answer because he knew I was right. Before leaving, he quietly said something I'll never forget. I don't agree with what Claire did, but if this turns into people choosing sides, I can't stop talking to her forever. I nodded slowly. I understand. But inside, it felt like I'd just lost another member of my family. and I was about to discover they hadn't even started pressuring me yet. The pressure started almost immediately. For the next week, my phone barely stopped ringing. If it wasn't Mom, it was Dad. If it wasn't Dad, it was one of my brothers. Every conversation somehow came back to Claire. Nobody seemed interested in talking about the divorce, my mental health, or the fact that my entire future had just been ripped away. Instead, they wanted to know one thing. When are you going to talk to your sister? My answer never changed. I'm not. A few days later, Mom asked if she could come over. Against my better judgment, I agreed. She walked into the house carrying coffee and a bag of pastries, almost like she was trying to pretend everything was normal. After a few minutes of awkward conversation, she finally got to the real reason she'd come. Claire wants to apologize. I don't. You haven't even heard what she has to say. I've heard enough. Mom leaned forward. People make terrible decisions when emotions get involved. I felt my patience disappearing. So this is just an emotional mistake now? No. But carrying this anger forever isn't healthy. I looked directly at her. You know what's unhealthy? She frowned. Spending years trying to have a baby, then finding out your own sister got pregnant by your husband. She didn't answer. I sat in this house crying because I thought my body had failed me. I could feel tears forming again while all that was happening. Claire was sleeping with Daniel and building the life I thought I was supposed to have. Mom quietly wiped her eyes. I know she did something terrible. No, I replied. You know she hurt me. I don't think you understand how deeply. She reached across the table for my hand. I pulled it away. I just don't want to lose my daughters. You already have. Her face fell. I'm still here, Mom. But every conversation we have is about protecting Claire. She started crying. I hate seeing this family destroyed. So do I. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. What if she came here herself? I didn't hesitate. I'd tell her to leave. What if she begged? I'd still tell her to leave. What if she said she was sorry? I looked my own mother straight in the eyes. Being sorry doesn't erase betrayal. She quietly stood up, picked up her handbag, and walked toward the front door. Just before leaving, she turned back. I don't think this is over. Neither did I. Because the following weekend, my parents made a decision that crossed a line I never thought they'd cross. The following Saturday, Mom called and asked if I'd come over for lunch. She promised it would just be the family. No surprises. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Part of me still believed we could sit down like adults and have one honest conversation about everything that had happened. The moment I pulled into my parents' driveway, I knew I'd been lied to. Claire's car was parked outside. I froze with my hand on the steering wheel. For a second, I considered putting the car into reverse and driving away. But before I could, Dad opened the front door and waved me inside. It's okay, he called out. Just come in. It wasn't okay. The second I stepped into the living room, Claire stood up. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and she was holding a box of tissues in one hand. Please, she whispered. Just hear me out. I turned to my parents. You lied to me? We only wanted you two to talk, Mom said. I told you I wasn't ready. Dad stepped between us. If you both keep avoiding each other, nothing will ever get better. I laughed bitterly. You think this conversation is going to fix what she did? Claire started crying. I'm so sorry. I didn't answer. She took a step closer. I never wanted to hurt you. You already did. I know. No, I snapped. You don't. She began sobbing. I miss my sister. I felt something inside me finally break. You should have thought about that before you slept with my husband. The room fell silent. Claire tried reaching for my hand. I pulled away immediately. "I've apologized 100 times," she cried. "Please, I just want my sister back." I stared at her for several seconds. Then I said the words I'd been carrying inside me since the day I discovered the affair. "You don't have a sister anymore." She looked at me in complete shock. "The sister you had died the day you decided sleeping with my husband mattered more than our family." She burst into tears. "I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you." "You can't. I'll do anything. There is nothing you can do." I took a deep breath. "I will never forgive you." The crying became louder. Then Mom suddenly stood up. "How can you say something so cruel?" I slowly turned toward her. "Cruel?" She nodded through her own tears. "She's already suffering." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Cruel?" I repeated, hardly believing what I was hearing. "You think I'm the cruel one?" Mum wiped tears from her face and nodded. "Claire's pregnant. She's under so much stress. The doctor told her she needs to stay calm." I just stared at her. "So now I'm responsible for protecting her?" "No," Mum replied softly. "But she's your sister." There it is again. Dad stepped forward, trying to calm everyone down. "Nobody's saying what she did was right. Then why does everyone keep asking me to make this easier for her?" I shot back. "Has anyone asked what this has done to me?" Nobody answered. I looked around the room. My husband cheated on me. Silence. My own sister helped destroy my marriage. Still nothing. I found out she was pregnant while I was spending thousands of dollars trying to have a baby. Claire buried her face in her hands and sobbed. "And somehow," I continued, "I'm the one who's expected to apologize for being angry." Dad let out a long sigh. "What can we do to make this right?" I laughed bitterly. "You can't. There has to be something." "No." He rubbed the back of his neck before quietly saying, "Claire's suffering too." I looked at him in disbelief. "Suffering? Daniel doesn't want anything to do with her." I frowned. "What?" "He moved out and has barely spoken to her. She says he's stopped answering her calls." For a brief second, nobody spoke. Then Dad continued, "She's frightened about raising the baby alone." I couldn't believe the conversation had somehow become about feeling sorry for Claire. "You know what?" I said quietly. "I don't care." Mom gasped. "I don't care if she's scared." Claire looked up through her tears. "I don't care if Daniel abandoned her." Another silence filled the room. "As far as I'm concerned, she'll never understand even a fraction of the pain she caused me." Claire started crying even harder. Dad looked genuinely disappointed. "She's still your family." "No," I replied. "My family wouldn't have done this to me." I picked up my handbag and headed for the front door. Behind me, I could hear Mom calling my name. Dad asked me to stop. Claire was sobbing so loudly I could barely understand what she was saying. I never turned around. As I drove home, my phone started ringing almost immediately. I ignored every call. By that evening, the text messages had started. Every single one asked the same thing. "Please, just forgive her." For the next 2 weeks, I barely heard from anyone unless it was about Claire. Not one person asked how my divorce was going. Nobody checked whether I was sleeping. Nobody wanted to know how I was coping after losing my marriage. Every phone call eventually became another conversation about forgiveness. I stopped answering. One evening, Mom left me a voicemail. "Please call me back. It's important." Against my better judgment, I did. She sounded relieved the moment I answered. "I just need one favor." I already knew where the conversation was heading. "What is it?" She hesitated. "Daniel still isn't speaking to Claire." I closed my eyes. "Mom, she's worried about the baby." "That isn't my problem. He isn't answering her calls and she's afraid he won't support the child." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So, could you speak to him?" I was stunned into silence. You were married to him. Maybe he listened to you. I honestly thought I'd misunderstood. You want me to convince the man who cheated on me with my sister to help the woman he cheated with? Mom sighed. It's for the baby's sake. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was so unbelievable. You've lost your mind. It's an innocent child, and I'm an innocent victim. She didn't respond. I continued. For months, everyone has expected me to carry the emotional burden of what they did. That's not fair. No, I agreed. It isn't. She tried again. Please, just think about it. I already have. And? My answer is no. Her voice cracked. So you're washing your hands of all of this? I already did the day I found out. I ended the call before she could say anything else. That night, I blocked my parents' numbers. Then I blocked Claire. Then my brothers. I needed silence more than I needed people constantly reminding me to forgive the two people who had destroyed my life. The next morning, my divorce lawyer called with an update. Daniel had agreed to move the process forward without contesting anything major. For the first time in weeks, I felt like something in my life was finally moving toward an ending. I couldn't rebuild what I'd lost, but I could stop letting everyone else decide what my healing was supposed to look like. That was the moment I accepted a painful truth. Sometimes walking away isn't giving up. Sometimes it's the only way to save yourself. It's been several months since my life fell apart. The divorce is almost final, and Daniel has disappeared from my life completely. The last thing I heard was that he and Claire were no longer together. Apparently, once the reality of everything set in, their relationship didn't survive outside the excitement of sneaking around behind my back. The man she threw away our family for walked away just as easily as he'd walked away from our marriage. I wasn't surprised. If someone is willing to betray the person they promised forever to, they'll eventually betray each other too. As for my family, things never returned to the way they were. My parents kept trying to reach me through emails and letters after I blocked their numbers. Every message said some version of the same thing, that life was too short, that families should stick together, and that holding on to anger would only hurt me. None of them acknowledged the one thing I'd been asking for from the beginning. Accountability. Not once did they tell Claire she had to accept that I might never forgive her. Instead, they kept asking me to sacrifice my peace so everyone else could feel comfortable again. I finally realized they weren't trying to heal the family. They were trying to make the conflict disappear. There's a difference. Healing requires consequences. They wanted convenience. A few friends asked if I thought I'd ever speak to Claire again. The truth is, I honestly don't know. Maybe one day I'll stop feeling angry. Maybe one day I'll stop thinking about what happened every time someone mentions family. But forgiveness isn't something anyone else gets to demand from me. It's a choice. And right now, it's not one I'm willing to make. I spent too long blaming myself for a betrayal I didn't cause. I wondered if I'd worked too much, if I'd missed signs, if my infertility somehow pushed Daniel away. It took therapy to finally understand. Something that should have been obvious from the start. Their affair wasn't my failure. It was theirs. They made hundreds of decisions that led them to where they ended up. None of those decisions belonged to me. Losing my marriage was heartbreaking. Losing my sister was devastating. But losing the illusion that everyone in my family would always stand by me, that was the hardest part of all. If walking away makes me the villain in their story, then so be it. I'd rather build a new life surrounded by people who respect me than keep chasing the approval of people who expected me to accept the unforgivable. For the first time in a long time, I don't know exactly what my future looks like. But I do know one thing. This time, I'll be choosing the people who deserve to be part of it. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people who know exactly how to hurt you. I honestly can't imagine finding out that your own sister had an affair with your husband while you were struggling through fertility treatments. Then, Instead of standing by you, your family expected you to forgive the people who betrayed you. So here's my question for you. Could you ever forgive a sibling after something like this? Or would that relationship be over forever? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more unbelievable Reddit stories about betrayal, revenge, entitled people, and family drama, make sure you subscribe to the Story Network and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.